the wonderful part here is that some of you have actually already read the first two books, which are Night Navigation, which actually is book 2 of a trilogy. None of this was planned. I certainly didn't plan to write a trilogy. And then book 3, which is Doing Time Outside. And so I'm actually tonight going to read from book 1, which was just published, because I started off writing a story and then another story and then another story and then another story, and then I would be in workshops with someone like Russell Banks, and he would say, these are linked stories, go home and write for the rest of the year, and when you get 12, then I'll give you a recommendation, that kind of thing. And so, but I did do that, and but again, it didn't sell. I didn't get an agent from that, and so just through the years, I just kept adding stories. And so first it was linked stories, but then it became more novel-like because I would figure out what the holes were. So for example, somebody would say to me, but how did these two women meet? And then on the basis of that, I then put in a story about the meeting, and that became the prologue. And then even recently I've added a few stories, like I wanted to show how different Dell's growing up was from Carla's growing up. And so I wrote the Dell story of her taking a bus. At the age of 7, she takes a bus alone to Savannah, which if you all can imagine a little girl on a Greyhound bus. And that's based on a real experience, and it was one of the most fabulous things I've ever done. It was wonderful. And probably, in fact, even today, many kids could take a ride on a Greyhound bus and be perfectly safe. I think it's sad that we started to be so worried about children being out in the world. It's too bad. But just to give you the genesis of starting to write this, because I've been calling this, as I market it, a prequel. So people would understand why are we getting book 1, now. And that's been just to find some way to explain that in an easy way. But I had never done any writing before, actually. I was a high school English teacher, and I was a high school English teacher because I love to read. And so somewhere in the mid 80s to late 80s, New York State started, first of all, saying, how can you teach writing if you don't write yourself? Because I was an English teacher. I went to Columbia Teachers College. I had never written memoir. I had never written a poem. I had never written fiction. I had written the standard research papers, compositions, and literature essays. That's all I had written. And so it was a wonderful thing that the English department started saying, you need to do all that. And of course we started doing that with our own students, which was such a wonderful thing to do with students, because they were really good at it. I had people who were way ahead of me in terms of voice, as in my junior 10th grade classes. But that's how I kind of got started. And then I was living off in a cabin, just sort of playing at this life. I was part of the Whole Earth catalog, Dropout, Romantic, Back to the Land people. I was one of those people. So I was living in a cabin. It had no electricity, so I used kerosene lamps, which are very beautiful, although when I had to correct my papers, I had to use a 9-volt battery and fasten a lamp to that because I couldn't see with a kerosene light. And there was a water pump out front. It was a wonderful place. I heated with wood. I had a good car in the driveway, so I wasn't living the life totally. I was sort of playing it, but there was an outhouse out back, which I didn't mind at all. It was no problem. I heated bath water in a big tub, and then I put it in a galvanized tub. That was the wash tubs that people used to use, and I could get in it all the way up to here. So it was really an interesting life. I wouldn't have wanted to do it forever, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it with children. But down the road from me, there was a family, and I'm going to stereotype them because this doesn't really fairly explain them, and especially for those of you who haven't read the book. But they were motorcycle people. They had lived in California. They'd come here under some of the same reasons that I was there, which is they had dropped out also, and politically they had dropped out. They didn't want to have any part of that. They wanted to be able to grow their own marijuana. And my children sort of knew their children in school, but I hadn't really known them. But anyway, I got to know them, and they were so interesting to me. We had a lot in common, really, but we also came from very different backgrounds in some way. I came from kind of a wacky background too, so it wasn't like I had come from, 3 square meals a day or anything like that. But they just fascinated me, and on the basis of that, I tried to start to write stories about them, making it fiction. And for me, when I say I wrote about them, I feel like the Merletti family. Not the Merrick family is very close to my own background in a lot of ways. It all becomes fiction, of course, once you start writing. But the Merletti family, really, I didn't know that much about them. Even if I knew them, I didn't know that much about them. So all I would ever need from them would be one fact. If I could just get one fact, and it would be a fact that would just, like, for example, I'm not going to read that story tonight, but the one fact that made me write the Tupperware story, those of you who remember the Tupperware story, is that Carla, I have trouble making sure I call the character the right name because I've had to change her name. The lawyer made me change the name at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. With having lived with her for about 12 years in my head, it was so hard to change her name. The name I had picked for the character was so similar to the real woman's name that the lawyer was concerned about that. And it took me days to find another name for her because it had to have certain things. It had to be 2 syllables, it had to be Italian, it couldn't be a nickname. I didn't want to go through and decide, would it be a nickname this time or the whole name, kind of thing. But anyway, the one fact that this woman, this person who they were had been very active in California in the Pagan Motorcycle Club. Well, now that you laughed at that, I'm going to tell you one of the things. You go to their house, and you know how some people would have, I may have told this before, because I certainly have told it before, would have on their table a family album of family photographs, but they would have an album of pagan arrests. Which is so wonderful. I mean, you got to write about that stuff. And so what happened was, she was in the woman who inspired Carla, and by now I only knew those people briefly, which is good. I only knew them briefly. So the stuff about them is 99% made up, but I always had that one fact. And the one fact was, she said, "Can you believe it? I've started to have Stanley parties." Now, do you all know what Stanley is? Home products like soaps and stuff like that. And I mean that this woman was having Stanley, and she was doing it because she was trying to present a respectable front to the town, to the Presbyterian Church and the Firemen's Auxiliary. And because she was in trouble with the school about her children, and they were talking about foster care if her kids didn't start at this one particular person. She didn't even have a daughter, for example. I just made up Tess, So, but anyway, when she said that, I mean, that was just so wonderful. Though, of course, I decided it wouldn't be a Stanley party. It had to be a Tupperware party. And then I could go to my school, and I had a woman in the school who was very colorful, too, and she had been to a Tupperware party. I'd never been to one. And she could fill me in on all the goofy things that are at the Tupperware party. So that's the kind of stuff that I had, and then from there, I would make it up. So the story I'm going to read tonight is called Road Work, for those of you who've read the book. And it's a little bit longer than I normally read at a group, but I've never read any of the stories out loud, actually, because I've never really had a book till recently, but what was going on with this story, Road Work, is that Carla is a bartender, but only part-time, and she needed really to make more money because she wasn't making enough money as a bartender, and that made for great stories too. The fact that the real woman did do some part-time bartending in a bar that I actually had gone to. So anyway, I wanted to have her get a full-time job, and so of course the big thing was like, what kind of job can I get for Carla, And so I was driving along one day, and I saw one of those big rollers, not the kind that you do asphalt with. It wasn't that. It was just a roller that crushes the rock and compacts. And I saw it as I was going downtown to get my mail on the side of the road, and I thought, that's it. That's the job for Carla. And then the great thing was, I had met briefly at a party somewhere a woman who had actually driven one of those and been on a road crew. And so, and the other thing to tell you about this woman is, she was one of those, she was in the midst of finishing her doctorate, and she just hadn't gotten her thesis done. She was in the road crew. So of course she was extremely articulate and a wonderful talker. And so I went to her house, and this is the only time I've ever done this, but I took a tape recorder, and I taped my talk with her, and which was such a great thing to do, because I really got, I mean, the story is fictional, I don't mean that, but she gave me the world, you know, in a way that I could never have gotten it. But then I didn't write the story. I got that all done, and then I went on to do something else. And I had a residency at Blue Mountain Center, which is up on Blue Mountain Lake. And I happened to take the tape in the tape player back in the day when we actually used those little cassette tapes. And I played it, and it just came to me. But it was 2 years afterwards. So anyway, enough said. Now I'm going to read you. And this is actually a story that's toward the end of the book. But because I think the stories do stand alone, especially the Carla stories, I always feel the Carla stories are so much better than the Dell stories, because in some ways, yeah, it depends. Some people Carla's a little too much for them. You know, I mean, she's a little too much of an outlaw. But I love Carla. And someone said that's because she's my alter ego. But anyway, I've often felt that in a lot of ways it's easier to work when you only have the one true fact. But I mean, I know the world in the sense that I know upstate New York and I love it, you know, so it's not like I don't know the roads and I mean, I've lived in that life for quite a long time. And I did have this wonderful interview, so, and you'll feel the texture of that, the real world of that. So, road work, 1992. This is how she does it. Forward, reverse. Forward, reverse. This on a section about as big as her kitchen. She goes over the same area an average of 8 times. Compacting, compacting, compacting. It's got to meet specification. A little college girl, paid by the state, runs around checking. She's affirmative action, just like Carla. Carla's the night crew percentage for women on heavy equipment. The roller she runs is easiest, the most expendable big machine. All she does is roll fill. There are a few women on the daytime blacktop rollers, but she says she could never do that. We're talking real skill. These women come to work in makeup, looking pretty, and run that blacktop roller back and forth like they're crocheting. What would be best for the company is if Carla was black, killed 2 birds with 1 stone. This is hard to come by upstate. The big boss takes the quota seriously. If you don't have the right percentage working, you can get shut down. They can't afford that. If they don't meet their contract date, they lose money they put up when they made the bid. This is a private contract, not like civil service where people take a week to fill up 5 potholes. The company's already got crews going 22 hours a day. Everybody's pushing like a maniac, especially if the thaw came late. You know what you're supposed to do, and you do it, even if you don't. Running the roller is a lot better than doing flag or picking rock 8 hours a day. Flag is dangerous. Carla almost got run over by a guy on a motorcycle who blew by the flag person at the other end, and it's unbelievably hot. You're standing all day in the sun with a half-hour lunch and a couple of 15-minute breaks, and it's not cool to say you've got to sit down, 'cause you feel a little faint. Picking rock, well, picking rock, you can imagine. Her first night on the big roller, Red, the foreman, gives her 10 minutes of instructions. Do this, then this, then this, and she was on her own. No kidding. No safety course. No hitching along for a day, looking over some guy's shoulder to see how it's done. Red switches this on, he pulls this on the left, he pushes this down, like that, he says, and he climbs off and never looks back. No good luck and no goodbye. At first, when the big roller goes up on a rock the size of her head, she's sure she's going to tip over. Her first few nights, she thinks she may have to stuff her shirt in her mouth to stifle her scream, though actually it's usually so noisy no one would hear you if you screamed bloody murder. Do not change gears while transmission is engaged is about all you have to remember, and that's written in inch-high letters right under your nose. There are just two gears, slow and fast. She only found out there was more than one after she'd been on the job a month, when Red peered up at her through the 4 a.m. glow after she'd brought the roller to its final stop for the night and said, "Carla, tomorrow give fast a look over." Hearing Red's voice coming up out of the dark was a shock. Most communication is done by sign language. Plus, most of the time, you're wearing earplugs. Doing roller, you have two completely different work situations. One is when you're part of the beehive. The trucks go in and dump the gravel, followed by the bulldozer that distributes those piles, followed by Carla on the roller. Not too far ahead are the earth movers, machines as big as her house, totally changing the geography, pushing the hill that was here into the chasm that was there. Unbelievable. And the noise, the ground shakes like some polka hall for giants. Or you can be all alone, because the big roller is the last thing to shut down. You can be the only one, except the foreman, still on the site at 4 in the morning. Whatever's been leveled has got to be rolled because it might rain. Then the site is quiet except for the back and forth clank of her own machine. Forward, reverse. Forward, reverse. This is when you can fall asleep. Every now and then you kind of jerk and you realize you've been out, and already you've had these little bits of dreams, usually dreams that have some sort of clanking at their center. It gives you a lot of time to think. What Carla thinks about is this. She wishes she hadn't started right off yelling. She wishes she'd gone into the kitchen, sat calmly down across the table, taken a couple of breaths and said, $85 is missing from my room, and then just waited. Or even if she'd started out all wrong, when Tess said, "What, you think I'd lie to you?" She wishes she hadn't backed away from that, and that she'd been able to say, "Yes." This isn't the first time. It happened 3 or 4 times before, at least, but this is the biggest amount. The first few times, she kept dumping everything out of her purse and carefully sorting piece by piece through every section of her wallet, even the hidden compartment which she absolutely never uses, in between the pictures, in the photo fold-out, down in the bottom of her reading glasses case. Ridiculous. And already that heavy stone dropping, like what she's got, is a deep well from just below her throat to somewhere just above her pubic bone. Tess. Then, hiding her money under the cushions in her room and finding it gone. She's pretty sure she knows what Tess is doing with the money. That's the main thing. It's not just the money that she's stealing from her. The even bigger thing is what she's pretty sure she's doing with it. She can't keep backing away from that. 18 and headed for adult time trouble. No more juvenile offender, name in the paper, on your record, everything. Tess, I want to talk to you. Tess, I want you to know. Tess, I'm concerned about. If her brother still lived home, she could lean on him. But he's off on his own. There's no more counting on Rudy. Sending Tess to paint with Steve in Utica didn't last 3 weeks. Well, sure, Steve says. Why should she work when she can sponge off you? Father love. And she knows Steve's right, but she's afraid what will happen to Tess if she kicks her out. She's been reading a book by one of those sad story people left behind. It's by this Zen monk with a name full of letters and weird places she wouldn't even pretend to pronounce. Little bitty readings for each day, and some of it makes sense. The part about leaving no shadows. That's what she wishes she could do when she talks to Tess. Leave no shadows. The way she does it, she casts dark blotches every which direction, and Tess ducks in behind one of these, and she follows her, and they never end up where it was she thought they needed to go in the first place. In fact, after the fight, often she can't even remember where that was. How she got working on the road crew, the last thing she would ever have imagined herself doing, well, maybe one notch above driving tractor-trailer, was that her neighbor's husband says to her one day, after he's heard her bitch for years about what a drag it is never having a car that starts, "Why don't you apply for the road work out off Route 12? What?" she says. "You could be the flag lady, ha ha ha, and collect unemployment all winter." The ha 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 revved her up. She knows about how they have to hire a certain number of women, and working with a bunch of road guys checking you out surely can't be all that different from tending bar. Easier, in fact, since they won't be loosened up with booze. Part-time at the Edgewater Bar and Grill isn't enough to keep things running, and the thought of unemployment, of not having to lug her battery in on dark February nights to bed it down by the wood stove so her car will start the next morning, is her idea of going to heaven. So one day, on her way into the Edgewater, she swings over to Route 12 and pulls in by the trailer at the Four Corners, which she thinks is maybe the on-site headquarters. She's expecting whoever's in charge to kind of give her a look down his nose, or at best the once-over to size up her biceps. But no. Right away, after she raps on the door, this man, turns out he's actually part owner of the company and probably worth $1 million, greets her in a courteous, businesslike manner, and when she states her name and that she wonders if they have any openings, shakes her hand, gives her an application, and moves some stuff off the table so she's got room to write. She's floored. The last time she applied for a real job at Marwick Eaton Pharmaceutical, there was a glass window between you and some receptionist, and you were lucky if you could catch her eye and get her to make direct human contact. The roadwork application is straightforward. None of your business questions. They do not ask what is the highest grade completed, which actually she minds a lot less now that she's got her GED than when she should have said 8th. They do not ask, what is your marital status? Always an eeny, meeny, miny, mo question for her, since they don't have estranged or occasional. They do not ask if you've ever committed a felony. Here she can give a straight no, but it always gives her a long pause, wondering who, in their right mind, would say yes. There's no place for references, no place for who they could call in an emergency. On the previous employment line, she lists the Edgewater Bar and Grill in Stanton, the Maycomber Box Factory in Marwick, and a go-go bar in Monterey. The application doesn't include a doing what slot, but she wouldn't have put down go-go dancer even if it had. She finishes the application. Bill DiStefano takes it, tells her they've got nothing right then, but she should keep checking back because something might open up. She stops by every 3 or 4 days, and lo and behold, a few weeks later, she's doing flag. $14 an hour, time and a half if it's over 8, bringing home $500 a week and likely to get back anything she pays in taxes, with unemployment compensation not so far down the winter road that she can't spot it on the horizon whenever her wrists, her muscles, are aching so bad she's not sure she can drag herself out of the bed. Way past 8, and the sun's going down. It gets a lot harder to judge the distances at dusk. Up ahead, she sees that one of the earth movers is waiting for the electric company to finish rerouting a line, so the whole beehive has come to a halt. Red is giving her the open hand back and forth under his chin, which means turn off your machine. She does. The 2 dump trucks and the bulldozers do the same. The site becomes quiet. Now you might think that given this unexpected lull, there'd be a bit of conversation, a few jokes hollered across the way, maybe an update on Ralph's new baby, how Clem's wife's coming along with her after her operation, what happened at Burton's son's hearing. No, there is no talking while you're working. Usually it's too noisy. But even when it isn't, these men don't seem to feel the need to reach out with words. At first, she tried to stir up a little chit-chat during the waiting around times, thought maybe all their voices needed were little jump starts of interested questions. How many kids do you have? Been working on the roads long? You from around here originally? And though they were polite, and gave her brief responses, the conversation sputtered to a stall right away because they never returned with anything near a, "What about you?" Okay, she got the message. You know the word taciturn? Yup. They do talk during the midnight break, but it's pretty much always the same conversations. Past year's hunting stories, told again and again with amplifications, and what's the present game situation, buck sighted, where the turkeys are feeding. At least 3 times she's heard Clem's story about the most beautiful 10-pointer ever that he had dead in his sights up on state land, how he didn't move and watched the buck coming on, a perfect shot, and then saw a flash of red just beyond, his brother-in-law making the drive from the other side. He had to lower the gun and let that buck go. The men all shake their heads. Yeah, they know the feeling. His loss is their loss. And she's getting, so she feels it too. Or they talk about vehicles, current problems with and advice on, hot items called about in the automotive section of the penny saver that had already gone, fond memories of faithful trucks or tractors or cars that just wouldn't quit. Except for Scott. Right from the go, they've all been polite to her, treated her like a daughter or a sister, moved over to make room on a tailgate, cut way down on the swearing and been apologetic when they forgot. She's had to watch her language, lest they be disillusioned. Occasionally, when some of the personal topics forced its way to the surface, Clem's wife's cancer, Burton's son's DWI, the sympathy was there, in the slow nodding of heads, the pained looking away. She'd said a little about Tess, her concern, how tough it's been for Tess not to have a father living home. Kids, Red said, shifting his position like he was grounding himself for a blow. There seemed to be a general consensus. The less said, the better. Words make it worse. The electric company's still jockeying with the line. Red signals. It'll be about 10 more minutes. She shifts around a little to see if her bladder could use a quick trip to the woods, and when she feels it doesn't, she stretches her legs and does some neck rolls. She lights up. They're allowed to smoke during the temporary shutdown times. She sees Clem and Burton are doing the same. Red's chomping on some vegetable, what he chews on since he quit smoking in June. His doctor said if he wanted his heart to take him through a few more years, he better quit smoking, quit drinking, quit running around after fast women. He gives a big laugh at that one, since everybody knows he's been married for 45 years, and he'd get the frying pan right on his head if he even, well, it just wouldn't have been worth the trouble he'd have stirred up at home. He says he's starting to get orange from all the carrots. Red, what a nice man. He's more talkative when he runs her back to her car in his truck at the end of the shift. Usually they're the last ones to go. She sees that the men ahead of her have gotten down off their machines, out of the trucks, checking their tires. Scott is looking off toward the hills, just above the stand of pines. That kind of sun, so red, so flat, such a perfect circle stuck in the sky, it doesn't seem real. Like that picture on Dell's calendar, that fiery spot up there might be the just before moment of Dell's picture, with its blue-black sky and its pasted-on moon, and under this sun the gypsy would still be playing his lute, the lion watching, the lion exactly the same. That lion and Scott, yeah. Men. All of the years she's been studying men as a daughter, lover, wife, mother, and even lately, as friend, she still feels like she arrived in the middle of the movie, that she must have missed some important scene or clue that propels the action forward, that convinces you in due time it's all going to come together. What they're doing and why they're doing it is going to, within the larger story, make sense. Be logical, be rational. Isn't that how they build themselves? No, that's it. This is her latest theory. There are no threads, no dropped hints that when looked back on from the final shot will lead her to exclaim, "Oh gosh, now I get it." Nope. Men are moved by random impulses just like the rest of us. but they square the goopy consequences off every day so they fit it into 2 or 3 different compartments they've smacked together for storage in order to leave a little space for future maneuvers. And there you have it, the male mind. To her, it looks sort of like a combination garage, local post office. At least with women, you know you're in a giant junk shop right from the go, no deceptive advertising, and the most you can hope for is to keep a running inventory, an inventory that never promises to really list everything in stock all at once. Men, of course there are many good ones like Red and Clem, but here's the thing. How come, with a nice guy, she never feels any electrical activity whatsoever? Besides the book by the monk, somebody left this article around about women who always go for rotten guys. Not rotten exactly, maybe more like no vacancy whenever you're needing a room. It's that time of evening when all the trees have started to glow, a kind of light, a spell, a shimmer it's hard to describe, pink gold, lavender lemon, a time when the gods or ghosts may speak. The trunks and branches stand out black against the mowed fields. She likes the way the farmers roll their hay and leave it hunched along the ridges. July is the time of Queen Anne's lace. Hundreds of pale, luminous discs feather up on the banks, and when you look at them close, each one is made of ring upon ring of tiny flowers, and at the very centers there's a purple blossom, one drop of blood. She never saw that dark center before doing road work, until one evening when she was squatting off in a private sea of lace some distance from the crew. Red motions her to turn the roller back on, a fisted knock on his chin with his right hand, and everyone climbs back in and fires up. It reminds her of these TV concerts where the conductor waves his stick to the side and all the violins begin. She rolls forward in slow, positioning herself so she can watch Scott's profile as he works the dozer. She knows he will not signal when he's done. She'll have to pick it up from the way he turns his head, by his now familiar final checking each side before he swings out of the line. He does not like her, and she doesn't know why, but from the beginning he made it clear she can expect nothing special just because she's a woman. He doesn't do anything active. More, it's like he looks right past her. A real son of a bitch, she once told somebody, and then, for the first time, realized what that meant, and ever since she's rephrased her description. A real son of a gun. Scott can be a real son of a gun. Scott swivels to check each side and turns the bulldozer in the direction of Clem's truck. Of course, he leaves barely enough room for her to squeeze by. Screw you, Scott. She doesn't grant him the satisfaction of a glower. She'd like to give his arrogant profile the finger, but instead she smiles and raises her hand in a cheery, hey, no problem wave, which he pretends not to see. She moves up onto the piles of gravel, and without any wasted maneuvers, begins her steady roll. Del Merrick should see her now, working, really working. Maybe she should give Del a call. The first couple of passes over the area, she'll keep it in slow, but after that she can speed up. No question that after 3 months of this, she's getting more expert. At 42, she's holding her own, her body still generating interest, but by Friday the muscles of her wrists, her neck, and lower back get so tight she has to keep up a diet of ibuprofen, which she can sometimes feel having its way with her stomach. Running the roller on average of 50 hours a week means that pretty much all she does is work and sleep. Even so, there's the constant fatigue. Good sleep is hard to come by in the daytime. Just as well, she isn't in love at the moment. She's too knocked out for sex. And it's hot, even with the fan. Impossible to get it dark enough to fool her sleep system. If you want air, you have to have a little light too. Usually she's so wound when she first gets home around 5, she can't settle. She does a couple of loads of laundry, defrosts the fridge. She doesn't vacuum since Tess is still sleeping. Later, when she finally drops down into that exhausted heaviness where she dreams she's been run over by something with enormous tread, The noise of Tess racketing around on the stairs pulls at her. She wants to yell out her great need to be allowed to stay under, and maybe she actually does, but usually it feels like her mouth cannot pull itself open, that her arms are encased in an oily black ooze. I think I am going to need to get a drink. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. She laps a foot or so, the roller mark of her last pass, and creeps steadily forward. Around the smell of dust and exhaust, there's a smell of rain, something moving in that the sky doesn't know about yet. The lights come on. The big generator hums beneath the clank of her machine, the swash of gravel, the roar of the earth movers, followed by the scraper's raking screech. Road work is noisy business, even through her plugs. The roller lifts as it climbs over several rocks as big as basketballs. There are these tense seconds of imbalance, and then the machine settles again. Ahead of her stretch 3 sections, each the size of her living room, compacting, until an early break at 11, and then only an hour or so after that on her own. Words come down, they're knocking off early, with full play, a reward from the company. They're ahead of schedule, and tomorrow's the 4th of July. Until then, all she has to do is roll. The monk said, "It's good to follow your breathing. Breathing in, I am going forward. Follow your breathing and just let your thoughts float up. Like a guard at the palace gates, you know what is coming in and what is going out." In the distance, backing the flanks of the biggest machine, the final red glow of the sun. Carla rolls forward and breathes. 1, 2, 3. It's hard to hear who's coming in and who's going out in all that roar. Yesterday, she found the back of the old dryer dented, the top beaten, the control dial smashed. On the opposite side of the barn, a rocker she'd hoped to fix up, broken to pieces as though it had been hurled against the wall and then stamped into bits. Lying in the middle of the floor, Steve's wrecking bar. She knows what has happened. This is the scene of one of Tessa's rages. So far, she's never witnessed her furious smashing, has only come upon the broken results. Her first feeling is always relief. It's been things, and not people, she's hurled so far. She knows, has known for a long time, Tess is not okay. There's a misfire someplace, and what Tess is doing is making it worse. Less spaces between, a constant jitter. Steve thinks she's making a mountain out of what's just being 18. He can't see it, was out of the house before it started. The going off over nothing, the angry eruption of dislocated words, the spooky silence after. Now, the stealing. The coming home after she's gone to bed, still sleeping when she leaves. Of course Tess is hiding, avoiding interrogation. But this weekend, enough hours off in a row to gather her strength, she'll get Steve to come. Steve without Marion. She'll present him with the evidence, the morning after fury in the barn. She'll tell Steve the part about no shadows. Maybe, calmly, together, her mother and her father, they can find a way in. Red makes the rounds, signaling time to shut down. That means everybody but the roller. He motions that he has info. Up ahead, Scott's leveling the last section she'll do. There's a final mutter of dying machines. She turns hers off too and comes to rest in the quiet, scans her body, the shooting pains in her wrist. Clem and Burton flash her a wave and head out for home. Red cuts the lights along the line. All but the section she'll roll. She slides down. After her butt and her legs have been vibrating, bumping along for hours, the return to earth surprises her feet. There are a few weightless moments, a shifting of gravity, time to convince her limbs they're of equal length. In this semi-dark state of imbalance, Red's voice makes her jump. "Carla, I figure you've got about an hour to go. Take whatever break you need, and then get that final section good." He sniffs the air, raises his hand like he's checking the breeze. "Feels like rain, and we won't be back till Monday." She nods and sways from side to side, stamping her feet to bring the blood down. Scott'll be done by the time you finish your break, and then he's going to hang out and close down for me here after you've rolled. He'll give you a ride back in his car. Is that all settled? She hears her voice say. It's been hours since she's spoken, and what she wishes that voice said is, Red, don't leave me. Yep, everything's set. He looks over his shoulder, leans his head to one side and closes his eyes like he's going through an is there anything I forgot routine. Then he gives her a smile and moves off in the dark. Have a good long weekend, he calls. Get yourself out on a picnic. See the fireworks. You deserve it. You too, she answers. Then she hears the slam of a door, watches his taillights recede. The scraping of the bulldozer pushing gravel stops. Just her and Scott, alone on the road. She breathes. Her guard at the gates is making the moves to calm down. Scott backs the bulldozer in beside the two trucks. He gets off and starts toward the roller. He's a tall man, maybe 50, one of those men who hasn't started to age, lean, a man who never sits down. No, he isn't what you'd call good-looking, but he's got that, whatever it is, you know he's there without even turning around. The only man on the job who gives her that jolt. Just like the magazine said. She knows he's married, but he's got the eye, that flicker of current he's still testing the air. When he's within range, she calls to him friendly, no edges, she hopes. Gonna duck into the woods for a minute, and then get rolling. Get us out of here as fast as I can. Okay by me, he says. His face is in shadow, his back to the light. In the 3 months she's been on the crew, this is the first trade of words. She leaves him leaning against the machine, with her flashlight, locates her path, jumps the ditch, heads for the turf she's marked as her own. There's a smell of wet grass and manure from the cow yard just down the way. She hears an occasional sighing moo, the thud of heifers bumping the fence. The thicket of pines is her perfect close spot. Portable toilets backed by the trailer are too far to do her much good. When she first started working, she'd expected joking asides on her return from the trees. But instead, there's been that same respectful distance, a shy looking away. No question, the bathroom breaks are easier for guys, but with practice she's got it down to an elegant bit. The monk says, whatever you're doing, be doing it. Breathing in, I'm unzipping my pants. He's big on the present, says that's all there is. Sounds simple, but no, it's hard to stay here. From where she squats in the dark, she sees the fiery glow of what must be Scott's cigarette. Crickets, frogs, some rhythmic chub-chub no one can name. The love songs of night, once the road work shuts down. She scrambles up the bank and heads for her roller, its familiar dark bulk hulk. No irregular lumps, no signs of Scott. One cigarette and then hit it, and then the drive home. To sleep in the cool dark of night, the pleasure of that. And no electrical detours. Remember, she's fasting. No more men for a while. She pockets her flashlight and reaches up for a match. It's then that she knows he's somewhere there in the dark. Scott? She moves away from the roller, back into the glow of the lights down the line. His flashlight goes on. I'm here, by the generator, just making sure I'm going to know how to shut it all down. She puts her light back on, too, even though she doesn't really need it here. Is she imagining it, or was he spooking around? Got a match? One quick cigarette, and then I'll get going. Just the patter of words stills the bump of her heart. By now, he's moved out of the dark. He strikes a match for her and takes out a cigarette for himself. Got any big plans for the force, she says? Not really. She is going to have a conversation with this man. Words, any words will do. Drain the current out of this situation, her attraction. Me either. I'm just looking forward to being off that roller for a while. He steps back a few paces and haunches down, braces himself against the bumper of the dump truck, but he doesn't offer any response. Okay, forget the chit-chat. She'll try something real. Well, actually, I'm getting my strength up to deal with my 18-year-old daughter. She's heading into some serious trouble, and I'm hoping I can get her father to come down, that between the two of us we can help her make some kind of turn." "What kind of trouble?" "Carla, don't blow this. Well, for one thing, drugs. But not just that. She gets into these out-of-control rages. She's telling this man stuff she has trouble telling herself. And you can't get her to see anybody? Just the mention of it sets her off. She said nobody's going inside her head." Scott settles full on the bumper and bends forward a little, shakes his head like he's in there thinking. She scoots onto the step-up to the dozer cab. He turns a little more in her direction. "My brother's son had a lot of problems. Billy, my nephew, looked like he was just a screwed-up kid at first. Problems in school, drugs, stealing, you name it. Up out of nowhere, tears, and they just keep coming." She wipes her eyes and nose with her sleeve. "You okay?" She nods, gets out another cigarette. He hands her the pack of matches. No, she isn't okay. Tess has been pretty much morning, noon, and nighting through her brain for weeks. Oh, longer than that. How many years? And how many years more? Bugs sputter around the big light poles over by her last place to roll. They sit and smoke. Feels like there's no hurry. The night has slowed down. "My brother and his wife have actually had to call the police a couple of times to get Billy to a crisis center. My God, I don't know if I could do that. Tess'd never forgive me. But that's not quite it. That's what my brother said. But he was afraid Billy was going to do himself or somebody else real harm. Well, he just went to the phone and did what he had to do. He knew there was no way of getting him in the car. But here's the thing. Billy's doing better now. No miracles. It took a long time. He goes to this clinic in Marwick. She knows Tess'd never go to any clinic. Like he's read her silence, he says, yeah, my brother and his wife figured Billy wouldn't ever get help. But after a couple of late-night trips to the hospital, he started taking some medication. One of the crisis people got something going with Billy, this young counselor. Maybe, if she'd been there, when Tess smashed the rocker, her fear for it all, would have got her on the phone. The clinic and the crisis center are listed under Onango County. My sister-in-law said she started sleeping better just having the numbers handy. I'm so tired of it, she hears herself say. Scott shifts away a little. We don't have any kids, so I can't really know what any of that feels like, having to pick up that phone, the rest of it. He rises and looks toward the last section. I'm going to start making the final rounds, but I'll be within earshot if you need anything. He's already passed back into darkness before she jars loose. She steps up on the roller and shifts into low. The lever is cold in her hand. The roller begins its steady roll. There's always more give until it packs down. Tess, something has lifted. It isn't until she shifts into reverse that Scott's word actually enter her mind, and all the rest of it, the longing, and she didn't even respond. No children. She can't begin to wrap herself around that. She creeps the roller forward again, squinting to see with her back to the light. There's an orange glow from an upstairs room of a farmhouse down below. This new road, running so close, must be a sad sight for them. One of those funny moons is just coming up over the barn. It's then that she sees the white spots moving, bobbing about, 2 or 3 feet from the ground, and hears mournful groans. It's then she realizes what those flashes of white are. She turns the roller off. "Scott!" she calls, trying to throw a calm voice back into the dark. "Look toward the barn." The monk wouldn't have missed this one for anything. Up on back legs, a white-spotted cow, mooing, moaning, crying, and dancing under a lopsided moon. I do like that story. I remember writing it so long ago. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I was surprised doing time outside. Tess seems like the good girl,
Uh-huh.
you know, in contrast to Rudy.
Right.
But here it's interesting.
Well,
that
she's
we've got-
18 and she gets it together.
Yeah. So
She goes off to Texas. She runs away.
do we have stories about that? Or no?
No, but you have that in, well, the end of the book, she's now come back from Texas at the very last, the last section, the last sort of epilogue-y last chapter. She's come back because her mother is in the hospital, and so she's driven her truck back because it's Christmas, and she doesn't know her mother's in the hospital. She just comes back to spend Christmas with her mother so she won't be alone. And at that time, she's probably, I've forgotten exactly, but, you know, she's 20-ish. And she's in Texas in a girl band, and she plays the...
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And she stays there for quite a long time. And she does, you know, some of that's just biochemical, I think, and also living in this crazy family. And so she moved, you know, she gets away from them and has a life. And so, but you do kind of see that change in the very last, because there are many years between the stories. You know, it's spread out between 1946, which is Dell on the bus at the age of 7, and then it ends in 1993. So it really spans a very long period of time. So people are growing up. And you know, what was amazing for me, because of course I didn't plan any of this, was that after you have spent so long on Rope and Bone, by that time, and much of this is truly imagined. As I said, Carla didn't even have a daughter, although I one time knew a girl with dreadlocks who I originally was inspired by. There's almost always some original inspiration from somewhere. But once you have spent so long with knowing characters, and I knew Tess in utero. There's a story in which Carla is thinking she'll have an abortion, and that's in Rope and Bone. And I've known Rudy since he was 3. And so by the time I came to write Doing Time Outside, which was the last book that I wrote, and this was published last July, I knew them so well that I don't think you would find more than 5 sentences of backstory in Doing Time Outside, because though you would think the reader at least would need it, who'd never read either of the other books, which each book stands alone. But I knew them so well that by how they moved through space and how they kept their life, you got it. I feel like it's a successful novel that you didn't need a lot of backstory. And in fact, that's always been the problem with Dell, because she's close enough to me in Night Navigation, and I think her chapters, I don't think they're as good. And that is because I knew so much about her, and I had to tell the reader. And of course that breaks down the narrative momentum of the story. It ruins the forward tension of the book. And so, you know, I think by Doing Time Outside, I just didn't need any of that, you know, because again, imagine I've known Tess, who is anybody really, but I've known her in my mind, you know, for so long. It's hard for me to call them characters, you know, they're people, they're people. So, well, thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure to do this. Yeah, thank you.